in Thailand, and paved the way for the first democratic constitution of the country. So I'd like to welcome you all in the name of the Stiftung Asienhaus. And I hope we're going to have a great debate today. Okay. As you might know, the revolution in 1932 took place on this very day. And in Thailand, all protests are forbidden. They've been banned. So they seem to be very scared of the memory of this day. So we thought it would be a good idea to open up a space to discuss the events of 1932, but of course to analyze the current regime in Thailand and the prospects for democracy. The military junta is apparently so scared of the memory of 1932 that they even dug up the plaque commemorating the revolution and replaced it by one which commemorates the monarchy and the happy open-faced ties or something. So they seem to be very scared of anyone talking about this subject. And they're so scared that actually the Thai embassy called the Foreign Office of Germany to complain about this meeting and the subversive speakers that we have today. And we also heard other information that officers from the Thai army and Secret Service people were planning to come here to observe the meeting. So of course we reacted to this and asked the Foreign Office to respond and call the Thai embassy, which they did. And so the Foreign Office has officially complained to the Thai embassy and have asked them not to disturb this meeting. So we're very happy that we have a democratic space here. We obviously want to have an open debate where different opinions are listened to. But what we won't tolerate is if anyone tries to disrupt the meeting, interrupt speakers, if people are rude to people with a different opinion. And if that happens, then I will ask you to leave politely. And if you don't leave, then we're going to call the police. The police know about this meeting, they are informed, they're ready to jump in if something happens. But I think it looks like we're going to have a very civilized and exciting discussion. So let's kick off with the first session. I'll introduce the speakers. On my left we have Nicola Glass, who was a journalist in Thailand for 13 years. So she's been at the front of it all since Thaksin came to power.
I entered the country in April 2002.
Yeah.
So he was already in office for 1 year.
So it'll be interesting to Nicola will kick off the debate. Then to my right I have Andrew Marshall, who is was also a journalist in Thailand for many years.
A couple of years.
But is also known for his book A Kingdom in Crisis, which I think the main selling point is that it's banned in Thailand. Right?
Exactly, yeah. My whole main selling point, but everything I do is it's banned in Thailand, really. So
it is actually a very good read. I enjoyed it immensely.
Oh, thank you.
So Andrew will be going next, and then on my far left here, Gilles Ji Ungpakorn, a prominent critic and activist, social and political activist, also known for several books, which I can warmly recommend, among which A Coup for the Rich and The Struggle for Democracy in Thailand.
Thailand's Crisis.
Yeah, but the one before I like. So Jai will be the third speaker. So what we're going to do is we're going to let the speakers go first. They have 20 to 30 minutes. Then there will be an opportunity for questions. Then we'll have another 1.5 hours for a proper discussion where I'll open the floor and where I'll also moderate the discussion to focus on a couple of points that might be relevant. So, without further ado, I'll let Nicola start.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for this kind invitation, Oliver, and introduction, and thanks to you for being here. As Oliver already mentioned, I used to be a freelance foreign correspondent, having lived in Bangkok for more than 13 years, and in October 2015 I left the country. But I still consider Bangkok my home, although present Thailand today is actually a very different place from when I entered the country first in April 2002. What we see today is a country ruled by a military regime which seeks to entrench its dictatorship by all means possible, by fear and intimidation, by mass arrests, by so-called attitude adjustments in military camps, by the abuse of the draconian lèse-majesté law, and an undemocratic constitution. And one of the reasons why I left was that I did not want to bow to self-censorship anymore when it comes to issues of the monarchy. As a journalist, as well as academics or activists, everyone has to decide for himself or herself in which way they could cover Thailand accurately when they are forced to omit the monarchy and the topic of the monarchy network. And in present-day Thailand, we see the military junta in what I would call an unpredictable partnership of convenience with the new king, Vajiralongkorn, who is loathed and despised even among royalists. And I will elaborate further what I mean by this, by the partnership of convenience. So the ruling generals who consider themselves as guardians of the monarchy are abusing the draconian lèse-majesté law in a way we have never seen before, as far as I can recall, claiming to protect the palace when in fact they are only protecting themselves and their craving for power. Basically, nothing has changed since King Bhumiporn's death in October 2016, only that the junta is exploiting this abysmal law in an increased manner. We will debate during this seminar in which way Thailand is moving towards a more absolute monarchy, who represents the real power behind the throne. So one thing is clear, Thailand was thrown back into the dark ages after the latest coup. So the dark side of the force has won so far. The topic of our panel is Thailand towards absolutism, 85 years on democratic construction and destruction. And the latest and enduring crisis since 2006, I think, is a very clear example of how democratic structures have been destroyed by military coups and so-called judicial coups. I know that you all know the situation in Thailand very well, but let me share some very personal experiences I made as a foreign journalist back then. And let me start with a situation I witnessed only 2 days after the latest coup. It was Saturday, the 24th May 2014, in the afternoon, when anti-coup protesters met at Victory Monument in Bangkok. And the mood in the capital was very tense this afternoon, since people protesting the coup were completely frustrated. So the skywalk at the Victory Monument was packed with people. I met so many who carrying signs reading "fuck the coup," sorry for my language, I'm just quoting, and "rest in peace Thai democracy," and "we want elections and pray you'd go out." So one of the female protesters I talked to, she really tried to blink away her tears, and she said, it's a shame, that this coup happened, and that these are really sad times for Thailand. And she said she feels so embarrassed by this coup, because she said, I'm now in another need to explain to my friends abroad, to the international community, why for the hell the military staged another coup in Thailand. I feel so ashamed and I feel so frustrated, she said. And those protesters back then, they would not dare, they would not care about the ban imposed by the army that forbids a gathering of more than 5 people. And soldiers kept watching. Some of them stood at the skywalk and the stairs of the skywalk, and they were checking the situation unfolding. And when several journalists and photographers, and my partner and me among them, started to take pictures of the soldiers, one of the army officers reacted very harshly, so demanding that we would erase our photos, otherwise our cameras would be seized. And as freelancers with a modest income, we were heavily dependent on our technical equipment, so we reluctantly agreed. And as a matter of fact, this has been actually the first time ever that soldiers interfered with my work, so in my personal case. It did not happen at the time of the coup against Thaksin Shinawatra in September 2006, nor did it happen shortly after the army crackdown on the red shirts in 2010, when soldiers tried to deny me entrance to the repression area, which I have visited several times in 2010. And I heard some of the soldiers whispering behind my back, and I asked one of my Thai colleagues what they said, and my Thai colleague replied, oh, they were saying, this is Thai-style democracy. Thai-style democracy. So, talking about the destruction of democratic structures in Thailand, the putsch on 22nd May, we all know, did not happen out of a sudden. It had a pretext, a background. And the chain of events had started over 10 years ago with street protests of the Yellow Shirts, the so-called People's Alliance for Democracy. And those demonstrations, we all know, paved the way for the coup against Thaksin on 19 September 2006. And the PAD accused Thaksin of corruption, abuse of power, and last but not least, of being disloyal to King Bhumibol Adulyadej. And the first large protest of the PAD I witnessed was in early February 2006. So masses of people dressed in yellow t-shirts gathered at Royal Plaza and said Thaksin should go out, he should be ousted because he sold his company ShinCorp to the Singapore government investment holding Temasek without paying taxes on that deal worth about $1.9 billion. And funnily enough, when I was doing interviews with PAD protesters, they only mentioned corruption, abuses of power and disloyalty to the king for the reasons that Thaksin should be ousted. They did not talk once about the gross human rights violations under Thaksin's reign, war on drugs, violence in the Deep South, and the forced disappearance of Muslim lawyer Samcha in Egypt, just to mention a few examples. So my opinion is when it comes to the issues of corruption and abuses of power, including severe human rights violations, the military itself should be in the dock, as the army is the most corrupt and power-abusing institution in the country. But PAD protesters calling for a military coup, calling to intervene, the army to intervene. So and since 2006, we have seen a certain pattern of political conflict. This all happened in order to oust Thaksin, the so-called Thaksin regime, and the whole political network of the Shinawatra clan. A military coup, of course, is a political disaster in itself. And from the perspective of some military circles, the 2006 coup went awfully wrong. It was aimed to wipe out Thaksin and the Thaksin regime and to maintain the status quo of a royalist Thailand, of a country where the old and conservative elites will call the shots and no one else. And I think a lot of people, many people anticipated back then already that this would become much more difficult after Bhumibol's death, once Vajiralongkorn would become king. And as Vajiralongkorn, as head of state now, the myth of a loving father of the nation could not be longer upheld. So we have seen in 2008 what I would call the resurrection of the PAD vowed then to oust the PPP-led government. Those protests culminated in the occupation of Government House and Suvarnabhumi Airport. And after that, in the end, in early December 2008, Thailand's constitutional court ruled to dissolve the PPP and to ban leading political figures for 5 years. And of course, this was rightly criticized as a judicial coup against a popular elected government. And finally, with the backing of the army, and then Army Chief Aunupong Pauchinda, the Democrat Party-led government under Abhisit Vejjajiva came to power. And at that time, every one of us anticipated a new round of political conflict in Thailand because the stage was set. now for the protests of the red shirts in 2009 and 2010. And lots of them were supporters or are supporters of taxing. They took to the streets to demand the dissolution of parliament and fresh elections. I cannot tell how many interviews I did back then, but I found one case very interesting because there were several people joining the protests or observing the speeches who were not necessarily supporters of taxing, but who came to listen to the speeches anyway. And I recall to have met a young man who said he just came to listen to the speeches. He was not a supporter, but he agreed with the red shirts on the issue of having free and fair elections. He said, I want to choose the prime minister by myself via elections. I don't want the military or by a political intrigue the prime minister to be chosen. I want to have elections to choose a prime minister for myself. And during this spring 2010, we experienced the worst political violence in Bangkok since Black May 1992, when the Thai army cracked down on the red shirts on 10th of April and finally on 19th May 2010 at repression. And I recall very well that several parts of inner Bangkok were like a war zone back then. And several red shirt protesters I talked to and I interviewed, they told me before the army was moving in at the end, that they were afraid. They told me they know that the army would come and they were so afraid. Some of them were crying. Some of them asked me as a foreign correspondent, can I embrace you? We are happy that you are here, but we are so afraid that the army would come, and we know how this would end. And now more than 7 years have passed, and those 7-year-old wounds will not heal until justice will be delivered to the victims. But now with Prayut Chan-o-cha, junta chief, who was deputy army chief back then in spring 2010, I think national reconciliation and justice will be more remote than ever before. And after July 2011, when Pheu Thai Party won the elections in a landslide, and Yingluck Shinawatra became Thailand's first female prime minister, so the military and the conservative elites again forged plans to oust the democratically elected government. And I visited the protest sites of the PDRC back then very often. I walking along with them to the streets, interviewed people several times, and during that time we saw a further destruction of democracy. So when the PDRC created chaos, confusion, sabotaged the elections on 2nd February 2014, demanded an unelected People's Council, and for the army to intervene, which the military finally did. So I would like to talk now about the situation in today's Thailand. Since the coup, the situation in Thailand deteriorated, particularly the human rights situation, while the generals of the NCPO seek to entrench their rule in the long term by fear, suppression, a controversial constitution, and last but not least, by the increased abuse of the draconian lèse-majesté law. Since the generals consider themselves as guardians of the monarchy, they have now to protect a king who is loathed and despised, even among royalists, and so they have to abuse the law harsher than ever to stifle dissent and criticism. The official figures regarding the rising number of lèse-majesté cases speak volumes. In early May, the International Federation for Human Rights in Paris and two of its partner organizations in Bangkok reported that the number of individuals arrested on lèse-majesté charges since the May 2014 military coup has passed the 100 mark. 49 of them have been sentenced to prison terms of up to 30 years. And just recently we had a case 2 weeks ago where a Thai man was jailed, was handed down a sentence for 35 years, and this sentence had only been reduced. Originally it had been 70 years, only reduced because he pleaded guilty. So up to that date, at least 64 individuals are either imprisoned or detained, awaiting trial on lèse-majesté charges. Our topic is Thailand towards absolutism, and the debates are about who is in charge, the military or the king, or both of them, because they rely heavily on each other. We will discuss how to assess the recent developments and if there were acts of interfering by Vajiralongkorn that could be seen as a royal meddling, of a power-hungry king who is wresting power from a junta, or just the contrary. And my fellow panelists Andrew and Giles will elaborate further on that. So my own theory is, if Vajiralongkorn really is considered an increasingly absolute monarch, that would mean he needs to invest continuous time and efforts to maintain that status. And the question is whether he would be doing so in the long term, apart from demanding changes to the controversial constitution. These efforts would become so energy-consuming that Vajiralongkorn, in my guess, would not find sufficient time to live his preferred life abroad, in Bavaria, far from his royal duties at home. So let me put it this way. Thailand is moving towards absolutism, since the ruling junta is in a partnership of convenience with the new king. And both of them are suppressing the Thai electorate unprecedentedly and ordering the people at gunpoint to obey. But this relationship, or this partnership of convenience, is an unpredictable one, as there are moments when the junta was completely taken by surprise by some of Vajiralongkorn's reactions, and we do not know how this relationship will unfold further. For instance, when Vajiralongkorn initially refused to sign the constitution and demanded changes regarding the authority of the monarchy, the royal household, junta chief Prayut agreed, since the military needed Vajiralongkorn's signature to enforce the military-forged constitution. As I said, both sides need each other, since the military derives its legitimacy to stage coups and to consolidate its power by portraying itself as a protector, the guardian of the monarchy. And while the king would need the junta to uphold the status quo which no one is allowed to challenge. However, I believe it is the military that calls the shots. So far the generals tried to tolerate Vajiralongkorn's behavior. They tried so hard to cover up his reputation, not only as a playboy, but also as someone who is considered brutal and cruel, since some of his former allies died under mysterious circumstances. But if there might be a situation that the junta cannot tolerate or cover up anymore, then the army would not hesitate to isolate the king, it's my guess, to purge him, probably. People keep asking whether there is a way to end military rule in Thailand, and I'm afraid there is no easy answer to this. I can imagine that many people were sick and tired of the decade-long yellow and red conflict. Nevertheless, I'm convinced that the majority of the Thai electorate wants democracy, a genuine democracy, as I was told in many interviews. But the question is how to achieve this. The country remains bitterly divided, and even if there would be a popular uprising, as we have seen in October 1973 or in May 1992 or even in 2010, we all know how brutal the army would crack down on pro-democracy protests. And already shortly after the coup, when I was doing interviews, a lot of people already told me that they believed that there won't be any elections in Thailand for a long time, even before the junta delayed elections over and over again. So getting rid of absolutism in Thailand might take a long time, and as the last 85 years have shown. And there are movements, of course, aiming to establish a Thai republic, consider the monarchy the key problem, and they seek to abolish both the monarchy and the lèse-majesté law. In the foreseeable future, I'm afraid, we will see more political conflict and further bloodshed, since the junta, the palace, and the whole conservative establishment will not give up power voluntarily and peacefully. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Blow by blow account account and also an interesting analysis of the partnership of convenience. And that sets the stage for the next two speakers. And thanks for sticking to the time.
Okay.
So, Andrew, so Andrew starts. Any direct questions for Nicola? The debate will. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So thank you all so much for coming on this 85th anniversary of the revolution in Thailand. I'm sure most of you have probably seen the news from today that Gilles Ji Ungpakorn, an activist who was formerly jailed, he tried to take a replica plaque, just put it back in Royal Plaza, and he's being carried away by the junta. He's being detained. This kind of extraordinary situation where the King of Thailand can organize the theft of a historical relic in the middle of the night. Everybody knows that he did it. And when an activist merely just tries to take a replica plaque back there, they get detained. We also know that Thai academics who are marking today in various places in Thailand have been visited by police and told they can't mention the theft of the plaque. It's an extraordinary thing. And the whole incident, I think, it really shows that under the new king and his allies in the military, they're really waging, it was a declaration of war on democracy when the king ordered the removal of the plaque. And we're also seeing, it's almost a war on history. They're trying to turn back time. And we're seeing a war on honesty and a war on truth, because you're not even allowed to mention these things anymore. And this is an issue that has been ongoing in Thailand, as Nicola was saying, for many years. Many of the people in this room are unable to go to Thailand anymore because we just try to speak our minds and we try to report what's really happening. And I think it's become clear that for journalists and academics, it's becoming exceptionally difficult to stay in Thailand and still do your job, because I was based in Thailand in 2000 to 2002 for Reuters. At that time, Bhumibol had retired to Hua Hin, Thaksin was just rising. The monarchy didn't really seem to be that central to Thai politics, and I think it was fine to be a journalist and report what was happening in Thailand without, having to mention the monarchy. But nowadays, and especially with following the succession, I don't think you can, as a journalist or an academic, you can really give a sensible account of what's happening in contemporary Thailand without saying things that are illegal. It's really become impossible to do your job honestly and without breaking the law. So this is a dilemma that I faced, that Giles has faced, that Nicola has faced, and many others, is that you can't tell the truth in Thailand without breaking the law. And that takes us back to Gilles Ji, who was detained today because Gilles Ji's trial, when he was initially put on trial for distributing some books and some CDs with the WikiLeaks cables, in which Prem Tungsulanot, the head of the Privy Council, and Anant and Yorachun and Sidi Satsila, they all discussed the suitability of the Crown Prince, or the unsuitability of the Crown Prince to become king. And Gilles Ji's legal team tried to summon these venerable statesmen to come to just confirm what the WikiLeaks cable just confirmed what they said was true. And the judge in the case said, well, the truth won't help you, because lèse majesté is not about truth. It's about, even if you say something true that insults the monarchy, you'll go to jail. Now, so this puts it in an extraordinary situation, because as we know, the new king has a lot of strange and he has a lot of personality disorders, and he behaves in a very strange way. Most seriously, of course, we know he's behind several murders. 3 people in his inner circle died in 2015. In the previous year, a senior policeman was thrown out of a window during interrogation. Jumpon Manmai, who was one of the king's key lieutenants, he's disappeared again into a secret prison that we now know, thanks to the work of Ajahn Somsak and Ajahn Pavin. We're learning a lot about this secret prison. Ji Ungpakorn is disappeared back into the prison. We don't know if he's alive or dead. He hasn't been heard from for some time. We also are starting to get information about the king's mistreatment of his former wife, Surat. It's widely known that after he divorced her, he jailed most of her family, including her parents and her 3 brothers and her uncle, Tongpat, who ran this criminal network. But what's less widely known, but starting to come out on Reddit about the lèse majesté law and about the photographs. And somebody pointed out that you can't share these photographs, you can't talk about the king's dress sense because it's against the law in Thailand, it's very strict lèse majesté law. And one of the best comments I've seen in the past few years from anybody on Thailand was on this Reddit discussion where somebody said, it's almost like they're deliberately making it hard for people to follow that law. Because the king, by his own actions, is behaving in an extraordinary way. So we're in this peculiar situation where the junta seems to have decided to try to stick with the king, stick with the monarchy. And I agree with Nicola, and Nicola and Gilles, and especially Gilles and I and others, we often debate amongst ourselves and disagree about who's really in charge. Is it the king? Is it the military? Who is the most powerful? And it's often assumed that because I thought the royal succession was very significant, I think the king is the most powerful, but in fact I don't. And certainly during Bhumibhol's reign, I actually mostly agree with Giles's assessment that Bhumibol was a weak monarch and a puppet. He wasn't really in command, and The King Never Smiled by Paul Handley is a wonderful book, but to me the mistake it makes is that it portrays Bhumibol as this genius who's pulling all the strings and is controlling everything. And in my reading of his reign, he's more like this kind of Forrest Gump style character who was being manipulated by others and was present at all these key events in Thai history, but didn't really take charge. But now we're seeing something different. We're seeing the new king behaving with extraordinary audacity. Everybody expected that because he's so reviled, he wouldn't really be able to maintain this kind of royal cult that Bhumibol did. So everybody expected that the power of the monarchy would shrink after he became, after succession. But instead, he's determined to actually try and increase the power of the monarchy. And I think that's something that's captured in the title of our discussion today, Thailand Towards Absolutism. Along with the removal of the plaque and other issues, we're seeing deliberate efforts by the monarchy to increase its power. And I think that's actually quite unprecedented. All of Europe, peaceful societies, I think it's quite unprecedented in the modern world for a monarchy to be doing that. Usually, as countries develop and become more wealthy and better educated, you tend to see these old power structures reducing in power. And we're seeing the opposite in Thailand. So, whatever you think about how much power the king really has, he is clearly trying to impose himself in a quite unprecedented way, and nobody's stopping him so far. Now, I agree with Nicola's assessment. I agree that really the king has no power without the junta, and without the military, and without the elite. And most of them hate him, and they're having a nightmare. It must be one of the worst jobs in the world to be private or to be one of the king's inner circle, who are constantly, at risk of being, facing violence, being criticised, being flung in their secret prison, and so on. And you would expect that sooner or later something would happen, and they would remove their support for him and try and find a way to move forward in Thailand without the monarchy. But so far they've totally failed to do so. Nicola's already mentioned the extraordinary story of the Constitution, where this was, a referendum was held with a huge amount of, publicity, but of course no one was allowed to actually debate the demerits of the new Constitution. A referendum was held to give this Constitution a veneer of legitimacy and democracy. And then once the new king came into power, he didn't like it because it reduced his own personal power, so he demanded that it be changed. First of all, because he wants to be able to live for most of his time in Germany without having to have a regent. And secondly, because there'd been an attempt by many of the elite to formalise a role for the constitutional court and others, rather than having the king being the one, the last arbiter when there's a crisis. And he refused that. He wanted to remain the arbiter of last resort. So it's an extraordinary attempt, a very audacious attempt, whatever you think of him, by the king to impose himself and try and drag Thailand back towards the past. And it's symbolised by the fact that he ordered the removal of this plaque, and we all know he ordered its removal. He's trying to turn back history to before 1932. And what's extraordinary is that he's being mostly allowed to do it by the junta, who could, if they wanted, or the military, they could, if they wanted, push him aside, by the Thai elite, who mostly hate him. I got a lot of complaints from some of my Thai sources last week, because on June 9, they held a 4-hour-long ceremony for memorial ceremony for King Anas, the Rama 8, who died. It was the anniversary of his death. And usually when the Thai elite went to ceremonies like this, in Kumipots, right, and they sat on nice chairs, they had air conditioning. But the new king is actually enforcing this culture of prostration and submission. So a lot of senior sources are complaining that even top-level diplomats, even top officials, are having to crawl on the ground in front of him. And in this ceremony, they all had to wear their full white dress uniform and sit on the ground for 4 hours in the heat. Prem got a chair, and Private got a chair, and the Privy Council, and they had little air conditioning units, and everybody else had to sit on the floor. And they were miserable. They hated it, and many of them complained to me. And of course, the obvious response is, well, it serves them right. These are the people, these are the Thai elites who failed to stop the king, who allowed this bizarre culture of veneration of monarchy to evolve. And now they're facing this reign of terror where they're very worried about what might happen. They have to sit on the floor in the heat. They have to prostrate themselves, and it serves them right. And so far, they seem to be doing it. And if we want to ask, why? Normally, if the country's military and elite were subject to so many humiliations, personal humiliations, which perfect people hate, and the king is so clearly a disastrous figurehead because of his behaviour, why do they still stick with him? It's a mystery, and I think Gerald's probably has some different opinions on this. But to me, I blame Thailand. I blame this culture that was fostered by the elite over several centuries or several decades, that it became normal for people not to think for themselves, to be submissive, to have to crawl on the ground. And it was claimed that this is Thai culture, but it's not. It's not. Nothing innate in Thais to make them have to crawl on the ground and follow orders. It's something that became, I think, inculcated over the decades, and the elite themselves became a victim of it, and now they don't know what to do. So if you look at people like Prayut or senior politicians and so on, there are people that need someone to give them orders. They're not able to really think for themselves. And Thailand, I think, is really what's been holding Thailand back and is leading us towards this political crisis. Last point I want to make, and a more positive point, is that I think Thailand is dying. Thanks to the internet, thanks to the behaviour of the monarchy, and thanks to the fact that a lot of younger people are no longer accepting it. So we've seen some very interesting phenomenon where, for example, a flight attendant was forced to prostrate on the ground, or somebody was forced by an official after a parking accident to prostrate, and people filmed it or reported it, and it caused a huge backlash. And to me, what I'm positive about is when I meet younger Thais, many of them, they don't follow this culture. They reject it. And, I think we're seeing Thailand imploding by itself, because it's very difficult to see where the junta and the monarchy will go. They still don't know if they're going to have elections next year. They've committed to it, but from latest information I have, there's still internal debate. And it's very possible there'll be delays again. either because the death of the Queen will be engineered, or because there'll be more bomb attacks, or so on, and the election will be delayed again. There seems to be an internal debate inside the elite and the junta about what to do. If they have elections, it's very unclear how the government can function with any kind of democracy. We know the new constitution is very undemocratic. It's designed to create a fake democracy. Give the facade of democracy without people having real rights. But what are the junta going to do? What's the military going to do and the king going to do when people are allowed to congregate in groups of more than 5 people and protest? When people are allowed to start making peaceful protests, they can't cope with these kind of things, and it drives the king into a rage. And so, when I read media reports, the media that remain within Thailand about the reign of the new king, they often say, well, it's gone remarkably smoothly, everything seems to be fine and there's no real dissent. I think that completely misses the point. This is because Thailand is in lockdown, and that's the only way that this situation is being able to continue. And the junta have put themselves in a position that, how do they transition back even to a semi-fake democracy, because they have to allow people freedoms that could bring everything down. So we also have a situation where King Gilles Ji Ungpakorn is probably the last king of Thailand, because who will follow him? We might have a queen next, because if he dies or if he abdicates, it's likely his eldest daughter might become the next monarch. We only know of one son who's still in the line of succession, Gorn, who doesn't seem well enough to reign. It's unclear. There's rumours that he has children with his new wife Nui, but I'm sceptical because we've never seen them. We often see the king boarding a flight in Munich with Nui and with Goy and others. We've never seen any infants on a flight. So the Thai monarchy is kind of dying, and Thainess is dying, and I think military rule in Thailand is dying, and that's why it's so vicious and so strong at the moment, because I think people understand that their days are over, and a new Thailand is emerging, and that's why they're desperately clinging on so hard. So it's a grim situation now for all of us who love Thailand, love Thai democracy, but I do think we're living through the end days of the old regime, and I think things will, I hope, improve. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. So Thainess is dying, the military is dying, and the monarchy is dying, so there's a new Thailand emerging. Quick questions for Andrew, or should we let Jai continue the room? Let Jai respond with it.
As Nicola mentioned, a man called Wichai was sentenced to 35 years for a Facebook post. And the question is, who ordered it? Was it the king or the military? And who is being protected by the lèse-majesté law? In the same week that Wichai was sentenced to 35 years, a man was sentenced to death in Pakistan for blasphemy on Facebook. Now, I think it's worth comparing these two issues. But first I want to say that in recent days, British politics have been very, very interesting, and the British media reported that Theresa May asked permission of the Queen to form a government. Now, imagine if the Queen had said no. Imagine the constitutional crisis that would have taken place. And yet the British media still said that she asked permission. I would say that it's not very different from Thailand. Now, Andrew's mentioned WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, when they were talking about, when the members of the Privy Council, or high-up generals, were talking to the American ambassador about Vajiralongkorn, they showed utter contempt for Vajiralongkorn. So why on earth would they let Vajiralongkorn order them about? And I think that this needs to be taken into account. Now, coming back to Wichai and the Pakistani man who was sentenced to death or long-term imprisonment for either blaspheming against God or blaspheming against the king, the Thai king is built up as a semi-god. When people are jailed for blasphemy in Pakistan or wherever, the question is, did God order it? Now, I don't believe in God, so he didn't order it as far as I'm concerned. Who ordered it then? And why did they order it? The Pakistani ruling class ordered it because Islam is used, like all religions, in order to protect the status quo. It's also used by people protesting against the status quo as well. That's the nature of religion. But, you know, that indicates to me that what you see in Thailand is that Vajiralongkorn is being used as some kind of god with absolutely no power, and his protection is really the protection of the ruling class and the junta, the people that hold state power. Now, I must really protest to Andrew about this use of Thainess. I mean, I've read about Western academics and commentators who wrote back in the 1960s and 1950s about Thainess, how Thai people ratsanuk. You know, they don't take anything seriously, they're always smiling, they can't think for themselves. What an insult! What an absolute insult! You know, the history of Thailand, and it's the 85th anniversary of the revolution, is marked by uprisings against the ruling elite. 1932, 1973, 1976, the civil war with the Communist Party, 1992 and the Red Shirt uprising. All these people thought for themselves. And you should go back and read the literature at the time, for example, writings by Gulab Saipradit about how people were thinking at the time. Now, rather than discussing the king too much, I think we should look at the military constitution. The military constitution has a 3-page prologue. Of course, naturally, it praises Generalissimo Prayut, His Highness and Excellency. It also talks about Thai-style democracy, which, if you want to put it in another context, is not really Thai-style. I mean, that kind of democracy was invented by lots of different people. In Indonesia, it was called guided democracy. So you get to vote a bit, and then, but the people in power still stay in power and still dictate what's going on. And I'm going to elaborate a bit about this later. But the funny thing about the constitution also is that it has a blatant lie in it saying that King Rama VII, you know, the guy who was overthrown by a revolution, actually gave democracy to the Thai people. Well, I'm waiting for a monument of King George to be built outside the US Senate, you know, the way that King Rama VII's monument is outside the Thai Parliament. My two arguments about Thai politics for this meeting are: one, if it is towards absolutism where we're going, it's absolutism of the military, not the monarchy. And secondly, the monarchy has no independent power. It's a tool of the military. And under Vajiralongkorn is even more the case. The guy is a half-wit. You know, he doesn't know how to behave. He isn't interested in politics and economics. Why would he need any power? How could he obtain that power? Now, I think that you have to look at the constitutional amendments that he insisted upon. They were only constitutional amendments which affected the running of the palace. They weren't constitutional amendments about anything else. The mistreatment of individuals, terrible that it is, are only mistreatment of people in his circle. Now, if you want to understand the relationship between the military and Ungpakorn, I don't think it's necessarily a sort of relationship of convenience. It's more like someone holding a very vicious dog by the lead. The military holding Ungpakorn, the dog, by the lead. Now, if you want to use the dog for whatever purpose, you have to let it out a bit. You have to give it some food, so that it does what you say. And this is why Ungpakorn is allowed certain privileges to do what he wants to do in his weird and distorted manner. Otherwise, he'd just say, well, tough, I'm going to stay in Germany. What are you going to do? So, that, I think, explains Ungpakorn's behaviour. Now, before Ungpakorn, Bhumibol, as I have often said, was a cowardly puppet who was placed in position and promoted and so on by the military ever since Sarit Thanarat. Bhumibol always went with the flow. His statements were always abstract and mumbling statements. He couldn't really string more than 2 or 3 sentences together properly. And you could interpret it in different ways. Now, I'm sure people here are aware of how people argue about the contents of the Bible. It's often contradictory. It's believed by some to be the Word of God, and yet you can argue about it. Well, exactly the same thing happens with whatever Bhumibol had to say. Because he used to praise Thaksin, but then whoever didn't like Thaksin would say, yes, but in this sentence he criticised Thaksin. Now, if we're going to argue that Ungpakorn is somehow got power, how did he get it? I mean, it's not something you go and buy in a supermarket. He doesn't have any. Well, he probably has a collection of guns. The guy's an idiot and a vicious one at that. But the number of guns he has doesn't compare with the number of guns that the military has. The other way you can get power in society is by having legitimacy and having public support. Well, he doesn't have that either. So where does this so-called power come from? Power isn't something, that doesn't have any concrete meaning. But let's get back to the 1932 revolution. Now, if some people are going to suggest that we might be moving towards royal absolutism, I think it's worth going back in history, because after the 1932 revolution there was a royalist uprising, what's called the Bawarade rebellion. This was crushed by the People's Power in alliance with some mass movements. For example, trade unionists joined the fight against Bawarade. It was crushed in 1933. And historians like Thongchai Minichikun say that the royalists gave up, and the monarchy gave up any thought of returning to royal absolutism at that point. All they wanted after that was some role for the monarchy. Now, the military and the elites who are in power, who came to power after 1932, are hardly likely to want to give up their power to the monarchy. They don't even respect the monarchy, this present monarchy. So I think that that's something to bear in mind. Why should the generals who are now in charge say, oh, all right then, you can have our power. I mean, why did they bother staging the coup in the first place? Why did they bother staging numerous coups in the first place? The second point about 1932 is that it was a revolution. If you read a lot of books in English and some in Thai, it makes out that it's a coup. A coup, in other words, supported by a handful of people, most of them educated abroad, with non-Thai-ness ideas. Rubbish. Bridi Panomyong, the leader of the 1932 revolution, said that most people, well, first of all he said when he went to study in France and he came back to Thailand, he discovered that ordinary Thai people were hating the monarchy. And most people involved in the 1932 revolution weren't actually educated abroad. And there is a lot of work done by the historian Nakarin Megdairak that points out that the 1932 revolution was supported, physically supported, also supported in terms of ideas by a lot of people. For example, farmers writing to complain about the royal government and so on. So it was a mass movement. It's not something that most Thais ignored. It's not the case at all. Now there's another issue about 1932 that we need to discuss, and that is the idea that somehow it's unfinished. Now there are two ways you can look at this. Either it's unfinished in terms of it being a bourgeois revolution, a revolution that paves the way to capitalism and modernism, or it's unfinished in terms of being a democratic process. Now obviously we don't have democracy in Thailand, but it's important to look at the idea that it's somehow an unfinished revolution, that Thailand never had a bourgeois revolution, the kind of revolution they had in France, the kind of revolution they had in Britain, and so on. And this is something that's still believed by people like Seksan Paseko in his most recent speech. This is actually an idea that comes out of the Communist Party, Stalinism. Stalinist stages theory. It says that you need a popular front, you need to unite with all forces, including the capitalist parties. You need to delay the demand for socialism because countries like Thailand or Indonesia or wherever these communist parties exist claim that a proper capitalist or bourgeois revolution never took place. Well, it's not true. Feudalism in Thailand was abolished at the time of King Rama V's revolution. He abolished all forms of feudalism. It wasn't done overnight, but it was finally abolished. And so the absolute monarchy that King Rama V installed in the 1870s was actually a capitalist state run by an absolute monarchy. It was a bourgeois revolution from above. You may think that's a very strange concept, but it isn't, because if you look at Japan, the Meiji Restoration was also a revolution staged from above in order to compete with Western powers and bring about nation building. And you can read about things that King Rama V did in works by Gulada Gedwuntumi and Chayan Ratchagun. So the failure of the 1932 revolution was really a failure to establish stable democracy. It did abolish the absolute monarchy. And I put this down to Bridi Panomyong's lack of understanding of the need to build a mass political party and therefore relying too much on the military. Bridi himself once wrote, "When I have the power, I didn't fully understand politics. Once I lost my power, I began to understand politics." And I think that really sums him up. Very courageous and honest man. Now, let's talk about the military constitution towards absolutism. The junta has initiated what's called a national political strategy, and this will be set in stone for decades. It allows unelected bodies powers to veto any decision made by elected governments in the future. This is the key thing that will continue the influence of the military and the conservatives. Article 5 gives special powers to groups of political leaders to determine the future of the country in times of crisis. Well, everyone can argue there's a time of crisis as an excuse. The Prime Minister can be a non-MP under certain circumstances. The military has powers to appoint the all-powerful Senate, and the Senate can veto government policy. The Senate has extensive powers to what these so-called independent, well not independent, bodies did in order to undermine recent elected governments. The Electoral Commission can also vet manifestos of political parties so that they conform to the national political strategy. So you couldn't have a political party in Thailand in the next election that said in its manifesto, we want to bring about a welfare state by taxing the rich. No, 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 no. It'll be vetted out and not allowed by the Electoral Commission. The constitutional judges can dismiss elected governments if they act against political strategy. The method of calculating members of parliament favours the military-aligned Democrat Party. It's almost impossible to amend this constitution. But of course it is possible if you have an uprising. I mean, the military have torn out numerous constitutions, so if they can do it, we can do it. And it specifically outlaws what I call reactionaries when they use the term populist policies. Like, now I'm no supporter of Thaksin, but you know, people talk in contemptuous terms about, oh, his populist policies, universal health care. You know, that's buying votes. Money to villages to create jobs. That's just buying votes. You know, now the people that don't like populist policies don't think that the majority of the population deserve the right to vote. They think they're too stupid. They think that the population should like austerity, should like having to pay to go to hospital for the good of the country. So this has been outlawed by the Constitution, and the Constitution also enshrines extreme neoliberal policies in the interests of the rich. Article 47 destroys the concept of universal health care, saying that the government only has duty to provide for the very poor. And right now, at this very moment, there is a battle going on in Thailand about the draft law going through about the universal health care system, with protests against it, against the draft law, which shows that protests actually can take place and do have an effect. Article 54 cuts the free education in the final years of secondary school. That's what Thailand is moving towards. And supposedly this constitution has passed, and yet we still see the use of the I say so, Article 44. Whatever Prayut says is law. So he's ruling by decree at the moment. Well, he was ruling by decree before, but he was pretending to pass it through the rubber stamp military-appointed parliament. Now, I've outlined a lot of things that show that Thailand is moving towards a system of guided democracy enshrined in the military constitution. There are issues, all sorts of political issues, social issues, economic issues. Wachiralongkorn has absolutely no opinion about this. None at all. Now, someone, as Nicola would point out, someone who wanted to rule Thailand would have an opinion about politics and economics and social issues. He's actually too busy on his bicycle being shot at by little boys. And the junta actually are very happy for him to spend a lot of time in Germany. Why? Because if he spent a lot of time in Thailand, people would, you know, it would be difficult to cover it over. You know, ช้างตายทั้งตัวเอาใบบัวมาปก that would be what it was like if Ungpakorn was in Thailand. But if he's in Germany, well, it's a bit further away. Now, people have said, why can't the junta get rid of the king? Well, the junta can't get rid of the king, and they couldn't put his sister in place because it would completely destroy the myth of the monarchy. There's all this myth about how the Thai monarchy, none of it's true, but it's what they want us to believe, that the monarchy is an ancient institution from way back in Sukhothai. Absolute nonsense. But they can't do that, because if they do that, they will destroy their own legitimacy. The military have only one single legitimacy. They can't claim democracy as a legitimizing thing, and that's very important in Thailand. They can only claim the royal, protecting the royal family. I don't believe Ungpakorn ordered the removal of the plaque. I don't even think he knew about it, or even cared about it. He probably has some vague idea about what 1932 was like. He's more interested in what he's doing with his women and his bicycles and his palace in Germany. So what is to be done? First of all, I would argue, let's avoid being sidetracked by focusing on the king. What happens when you focus on the king? Is that a step forward towards overthrowing the military and bringing about democracy? No, it isn't. Why? Because you can't talk about the king, so you can't do anything. There's nothing you can do. It's a formula for passivity. Yes, it's useful to share pictures of Ungpakorn's weird behaviour, like Andrew's done. That's useful because it actually destroys the legitimacy of the monarchy. But apart from that, what we really need is a mass social movement. We need political organisation to struggle against the military dictatorship and its legacy after they call sham elections. And this has been done before in Thailand. 14th of October, Communist Party, 1992, and all around the world. Authoritarian regimes have been overthrown by mass movements. Will that mass movement come from the red shirts? Or will it come from Pheu Thai? I don't think so. I think the red shirts have finished. I think that Thaksin and his allies have actually destroyed the movement by putting it into deep freeze. Will this mass movement come from the small student groups? Unfortunately, no. They may well be small acorns that grow into bigger trees later on, or they may be sparks, but the small student groups that protest are not interested in building mass movements. Some of them even say it's enough just to rely on social media, and I think they're wrong. So we need a mass movement. It's not going to be easy to build, it takes time, but unless we get a mass movement to overthrow the military and to install real democracy, we won't see the completion of 1932 in terms of being a democratic revolution. Thanks.
Interesting as always. I think there's a lot of stuff to debate now. Before I let the other speakers then respond to each other, I'll open the floor for comments and questions, different opinions, same opinions. Knock yourself out.
Probably worth adding, we're not going to film anybody asking questions, so it's safe to ask a question, because obviously it is a concern for those people who are here who still visit Thailand that you're at this event. So you're safe to ask a question without being on camera.
Since I'm going to talk about some of this issue in my afternoon session, I try to be brief here, but I feel that I cannot let this go without commenting. The issue of who have the most power between the military and the monarchy, it's come down to, this is what I said last year in Paris, that it comes down to how you define power. And the thing that troubled me, and I think it's quite wrong, is that you all, three of you, if I may say this, I think that you define power in a kind of utilitarian instrumentalist way or modern rationalist way. Power means you order this A person to do this B thing, C thing, D thing. It has to be something that very concrete, like order this to change this or do that. And once you define power like this, you end up saying that the monarchy had no power, or even Phumipol is just a puppet, right? And to pick up what Nicola said, that the alliance between the military and the army just, oh, by the way, the funny thing is that Phumipol probably never had that kind of power, or never at least exercised that kind of power, but his son actually did. His son actually ordered somebody to do this or this. But Phumipol rarely, I studied him for years, for decades, he rarely used that kind of power. You could say that he didn't have that kind of power, and I would totally agree. But it depends on how you define power. If you define power that way, you would end up like Phumipol have no power at all. The monarchy have no power, and the monarchy have power. To use our Nicola and use the word of convenient, right?
Yes,
so the
partnership
of convenient. And Andrew said even Phumipol is just a kind of puppet for the elite, right? One of the key idea in Andrew's book, which I think most of the people don't pick up. Most of the people, I think, read his book, at least his work, and thought that he must be opposite of Jai in the sense that he's think that the monarch Phumipol has a very much power. But actually, I'm glad that you spelled it out today. But that is the point that I think is wrong. And in the book you said the loyalists didn't actually loyal to Phumipol. They just use him, right? And so the whole book implies that you expect even Phumipol wasn't loved by the loyalists. His son would finish, and you expect this kind of war of succession all the time, but it turned out that it didn't happen. The elite happily let his son, this guy, become king, right? And so you end up, in the end, trying to explain how on earth people tolerate him. All this came down to the very idea, the very core idea that I challenge, that you all define power very narrowly. And to put it in a more leftist language, you all underestimate the power of ideology, the power of system of thought. You grew up in modern Western country, which this kind of thinking has long gone for a century. And you don't quite understand how people would love someone, how people would love this guy, how people would loyal to him and would feel that they could die for him, literally. Of course, in actual history, modern history, not many people die for Phumipol really, right? But they put others to die for them, right? But the thing is, if you define power that way, you would say Phumipol have no power, the Thai monarchy have no power, and you end up, this is just a puppet. But to come back to Jai finally, there's a sentence that's very striking for me. And unfortunately, Jai seem not to think of this in the overall framework. He mentioned at one sentence, I'm not sure that others can pick up. He said that power came from legitimacy and the support of the people. I totally agree, 100% agree. Power comes from legitimacy and the support of the people. And then I asked think about this and the whole framework that Jai said, the whole metaphor about God or the whole example that cite this incident and that incident. This is a kind of example or the kind of thinking that, as I said, instrumentalist utilitarianism, the definition of power, like power have to be certain A people order certain B people to do certain C's or D or E people, right? But come back to that sentence that Jai said, power comes from legitimacy and the support of people. And I ask, over the last century or over the half century, who in Thailand have the most legitimacy and the most support of the people in Thai context? Bhumibol, not by a really long shot. Anybody, no one else can compare to him. Isn't this kind of power? Isn't this the answer that he had the most power? But it's not he in the sense, and I'll talk to this in my session later. It's not actually he in the sense of he himself. It's both sense of he himself as Bhumibol and as embodiment of something that's very bigger. But I think it's totally wrong to think that power have to be defined this way, and then you end up cannot explain a lot of things, a lot of why Bhumibol has such this power, why he can trigger the process of that we call Tulakar Pivat and no one else can.
Okay, thanks very much, Sunsak. Please. What do people think? The cameras are all in this direction, so don't be scared.
We'll be starting the discussion
Yes.
now.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I totally agree with that power thing. So this is the first time I have heard that Bhumibol is weak and a puppet. I grew up in Thailand and have Thai education, and I read The Kingdom Was Mine. I think it's a terrific book, and it never came to my mind that he's weak, he's a puppet. Maybe he was weak before he came to power, but then after that he learned that he has power. He learned how to use it. I could believe. And I think at the end he shows that he has the power by several military coups, but he agreed on, or at least he did not disagree on military coup. He did not do what he could do. That also a power that he might have, but he didn't stop the coup. He benefited from it. So that would be my comment, that I sort of disagree with the weakness of him.
Thanks very much. Shall we continue this topic a little bit and then move on to other points? What do other people think?
Well, I'll quickly reply,
Okay.
if that's okay. I agree with Ajahn Somsak that the ideology and the monarchy has become an institution that has enormous power that can be utilised, and I believe that's why Gilles Ji Ungpakorn is able to do so now. But as you said yourself, Bhumibol never told people what to do, so I guess you're arguing that he had power but he never used it. And to me, when I look at Bhumibol, he couldn't even manage his own family. He couldn't control his wife. He couldn't control his kids. So we can see several instances where things that he wanted to happen didn't happen. So this is why I think I agree with you that over time the monarchy built up potential power, which his son is now using in a very obvious way.
Don't you agree with my criticism that, or at least you should try to reply that the whole that you just virtually every incident that you cite, that he ordered this, ordered that, it came down to how do you define power. And you always define power that this way, right? You have to define power that you have to be able to order person A to do specific thing C or D. This is not the kind of power that Bhumibol or the monarchy had at all. the fact, the actual historical fact that sometimes he can order something or not order something is not proof at all that he doesn't have power unless you define power very narrowly that way, right? And if you define it narrowly that way, I would agree with this or that incident that he had this power to do this or do that. I would agree. But the whole point of my criticism, which I don't think that anybody could reply really, that you define it, that you have to look at power this way, but why? And if you look at the whole picture of the whole Thai history, why not define power more broadly and look at it this way? And this is how the Thai define power. And to go back to the very sentence that Jai really like very much, power comes in modern time, not even from the gun. Gun might create power temporarily for a short period of time, but the real power in modern time comes from legitimacy and support from the people. Who else in the past 50 years come close to matching Bhumibol? No. Not a single person, not a single army chief, not a single popular, not even Thaksin.
But I think I would like to add something to this. I think we all agree upon that the military derives its legitimacy from the monarchy. Yeah? They have created a myth around Bhumibol as a loving father of the nation, and no one dared to challenge this. Of course, there are critics, but they're outside the country. And so I would actually would like to go into the direction and would agree with Gilles to a certain extent, because Bhumibol decided to have Vajiralongkorn as his successor. Vajiralongkorn was 20 years old, so it was the long-term decision already. And when Vajiralongkorn was 20 years, and breaking this law, this palace law, or disputing Bhumibol's decision, the military would never have done that. Yeah? Because then they had to admit that the institution, the palace, the monarchy, is something which is not untouchable anymore, which is something which you can handle any time you like. Yeah? In a way, it fits you.
Well, wasn't that power?
In a sort of ideological power, as you pointed, but it doesn't necessarily contradict Gilles' assessment to this. So I think the military deriving legitimacy, and it's all about legitimacy to suppress the people at gunpoint, from deriving this from the power source of the palace, this ideological power. Only if Bhumibol really, if he really had power, I really disputed this. Yeah. The power came for the old and conservative establishment, the military and the other elites, just came from the palace, because they have to rely on the palace, yeah, and they are staging coups in the name of the monarchy, saying, oh, the king is so sad, now we have to oust the Thaksin regime. And the king gave his blessing to the coup makers and endorsed the coup in the end. But it was not his decision to stage a coup. Yeah, there are military circles who decided to stage the coup in 2006, and in
for him.
For him, in his name,
Yes.
in his name.
Yes.
And in 2014, actually, the king has already
wasn't that
become...
power? I can.
Just a second.
I don't.
Just a second, please. Just one second. And in 2014, King Bhumibol has become already so old and frail and sick, and he wasn't aware of what was going on in Thailand anymore. So yeah, the coup in 2014, it speaks for itself. Yeah, who was responsible for this and who has the real power in Thailand. I don't think really it was Bhumibol also in the decades before. So it's really
I think you.
So, let Jai respond as well.
Yeah, I just want to point out that I grew up in Thailand and went to Saathit Jula, so don't try and claim that I'm a Westerner. I'm both a Westerner and a Thai. That's a rather racist explanation. Now, yes, Somsak talks about abstract power. I talk about concrete power. We can talk about abstract power if you like. We can talk about the power of gnomes and fairies and all sorts of things that are abstract. But real power in society can be proven. Now, yes, power can be derived from legitimacy, or it can be derived from the barrel of a gun and so on. The question is, did the King of Thailand, Bhumibol, have legitimacy in the eyes of the Thai people to intervene in politics? That's a key question, and I don't believe he did have that legitimacy. Otherwise, he could have done it. Did he have the power to say, we don't want Thaksin? Did he have the legitimacy to do that? No, he didn't. Now, when I was growing up in Thailand, at the dinner table with my mother and father, who were very close to ruling circles in Thailand, we had discussions about politics all the time. And they were of the opinion that Bhumibol was a weak, characterless puppet of the regime. This is not just my feelings. And the reason for this is that he never stuck his neck out on anything. He didn't dare to. I mean, okay, he was very weak when he first started, when he was on the throne. He wasn't even expecting to be on the throne. Now, this isn't something that Somsak and I would disagree about, because he's talking about a different concept of power. There are powerful systems of thought throughout the world. It's not just a Thai thing. There's a powerful system of thought about the free market, where it's difficult to argue against the free market unless you get movements in society that confront the issue. You got movements in Thailand that confronted the legitimacy of the king during the communist uprising. You have seen a revision of this during the red shirt movement. But it's not good enough to just say that there is this airy-fairy sort of powerful thought system. When we debated this in Paris, Somsak asked me to give an example of someone who you couldn't criticize, who seemed to be all-powerful, and I said, God. And that's true. It's a good example. God cannot be criticized in certain circumstances. You can be executed for it. People act in the name of God all the time. It doesn't mean that God is really powerful. So an ideological thought system, yes, the pro-monarchy ideological thought system has a lot of influence in Thailand, but its influence goes up and down. And actually, I think the person that had more power than Bhumibol at some point in Thai history was Thaksin Shinawatra. But other people who've had more power through other means, not through legitimacy in the ballot box, have been the military.
See? I think it's clear that there are different sources of power. So the barrel of the gun, money or capital, and ideology and legitimacy. So I think any ruling class uses all three sources of power to rule. And so I think that's pretty basic. Yeah.
Actually, I want to kind of look forward a little bit, and it'll be a bit utilitarian in this way, because it's interesting that we have the abstract version of power, and of course, for me, I feel like, okay, the monarchy as a system has or had it, but now when the monarchy changes to this current king, that power is gone. I feel that it's gone. He doesn't have that cult anymore. So what I'm wondering now is, how does that play out with the utilitarian power that the junta now has and that it's now using to suppress, pro-democracy discussion in Thailand? Because, of course, even if the people are not happy with the king anymore and they now see him as a person, you still have the actual power of the gun. So how do we go forward from here? What is, where do we go and what's going to happen?
Can I just add a little bit?
Let some other people talk as well.
I wanted to make exactly the same point, but also add to that, that what we're now seeing, even though we said that everything the current king has done is only within his circle, but he is exercising these powers more at least that I'm aware of, more than the last king. So that's quite interesting for me to see how does the junta now, because they're kind of in a difficult situation, or they cannot rely on this demigod anymore because the image is crumbling, but at the same time the demigod starts to certainly not be a god anymore who can be criticized and can be tested, but comes down and is visibly seen exercising the barrel of the gun kind of power by at the moment secretly taking people away or making people disappear, but over time that will not be possible to keep that under wrap anymore. So that's the question.
I think another factor is important is I think the time. Right now we can see the power of military very clear because we're living in the military dictatorship period. Now, if in the future, next year or 5 years from now, there is an election, even though there's a guy that, then I'm sure that, you know, the manifestation of ruling class power may or may not show within the military itself, right? So time factor and the period is important. And also, I like the concept of partnership vis-a-vis the who is in control, which is like a black and white, right? And it not necessarily can be shifted, you know, from this side to this side. So it's very important. I think you introduce very important concept with the partnership of inconvenience that I think is very useful.
Okay. Anyone else, or shall I let some second?
No, I actually not question as such, but I just want to add how important it is to understand Bhumipol power. If you define it narrowly and notice that I'm not denying that many instances can be cited that Bhumipol didn't or couldn't order this or that thing. I never denied it at all. I never reject out of hand this idea of looking at instrumental or specific instead. What I object to is to take this as the whole criteria to define power. My concept of power is actually isn't about abstract or about it all of the thing, but yours is just part of it. And what I would argue is that looking at Bhumipol power, you have to look at what it actually happened in history, and it support the idea, the point, and it related to the question that some of our friends just asked. The issue of Vajirangkorn is so important that our friend asked, is that it look at against this kind of power that the monarchy had, what would happen, and this also that you find it difficult to answer why the junta did what Vajirangkorn asked to absent for, which is unprecedented even among tradition of royal family. It's very wrong, but the junta complied. Vajirangkorn asked for revision of it, even though it against and the junta complied and so on and so forth. You cannot explain this unless you understand how this kind of power that Bhumipol built up consists of. Of course, we can discuss it later. How would happen that as our friend just asked this very important question, how would it happen when this guy which have no, everybody hate, how come he's still there?
I think what the more important thing to this world
Thank you.